we discussed ACS management. Management of ACS, that was initial assessment. Now just I want to recap the things which we discussed in last session. Initial assessment, कुछ याद है?
Yes,
Initial assessment.
सबसे पहले तो if the patient has any symptoms and the person is evaluating at bed at home, he should first risk stratify the patient whether the patient needs to be referred immediately to the emergency department of a tertiary care hospital or to a patient can be managed in a chest pain unit. So first of all, if the patient has high risk features such as heart failure, ischemia, chest, ischemic pain, any arrhythmic hypotension, syncope. So
shock-like status, unconsciousness, severe arrhythmias kind of feature, palpitation. So initial objective when you are seeing an ACS patient is to assess likelihood, is it ACS or not? And when you are considering it to be ACS, second thing is risk stratification. And the immediate life-threatening features are ongoing severe pain, severe SOB, pre-syncope, syncope and palpitation severe. If these things are there, this patient should be referred as early as possible to a center where you think every kind of management is available. Otherwise, if you think that likelihood is questionable or patient is low to intermediate risk, then you can send him to a center where he should be assessed first, whether he is having ACS or not. So these are the two things very important. And then we discussed what need to be done in hospital. Once you receive a patient with ACS, again you have to judge him as likelihood, whether he is, and how to go about ECGs, markers. ECG should be done within 10 minutes. Marker should be done according to the timing of symptoms. It not should be a case that a patient come to you within 5 minutes, you did a marker, it's negative, then it's excluded. That should not be the case. Now today we'll be starting, once you are seeing a patient in your ER and you diagnosed him as a case of ACS. Now how to start managing your patient? Stepwise everything, starting from a low risk to high risk. Right now we are discussing a journal approach. So how to start management? What first thing you will do? What then next?
First of all, if the patient, we are sure about that patient is a patient of acute coronary
syndrome. Let's see, I ask you whether you give oxygen to a patient with ACS or not.
Unless or until the oxygen saturation is 90 or less than 90.
Less than 90% or patient is looking tachypneic, then you will give. You have feel that this patient is hypoxic, then oxygen should be given. So class 1 for oxygen is, so that means every patient with ACS should have his saturation checked, especially if he is looking tachypneic or dyspneic, whatever. So oxygen according to. What about aspirin?
Aspirin first we give in a loading dose of 162 to 325 mg.
Yeah.
And then afterwards we usually give 75 to 81 mg.
Maintenance
is,
yes, it's written in guidelines 81. It's not 75.
Yes.
But British and Americans have two different opinions about it. American guideline usually suggests 81 milligram of aspirin as a maintenance. But initially as a loading dose, 165 to 300 milligram. But if your patient is aspirin allergic or he's having indigestion or anything wrong with his GI, a bleeding ulcer, then what should be done?
Then we give clopidogrel.
Clopidogrel can be a substitute if your patient is aspirin as well as a single antiplatelet. What about sublingual nitrate?
Sublingual nitrate can be given if the patient is having ischemic symptoms, chestpain. Then we usually give sublingual nitroglycerin. We give 3 doses, 5 minutes apart.
Irrespective of whether it is having pain relief or not, you have to. That's not a case. Previously, we used to give one and wait whether pain is subsiding or not. No. You have to give 3 sublingual nitrate 5 minutes apart. And what's the dose of sublingual nitrate?
0.3 to 0.4.
0.3 to 0.4 milligram. Sublingual, then second one after 5 minutes, then third one after. So 3 doses of sublingual nitrate should be given 5 minutes apart. Then afterward you have to decide about IV nitrate, whether you are going to continue IV nitrate or not. So how you decide that your patient needs IV nitrates or not?
It depends whether the patient is having ischemic symptoms or not. If the patient is having persistent pain, or if the patient is in heart failure, or the third indication is if the patient is hypertensive.
If these 3 things are there in your patient, his blood pressure is very high, he's having heart failure, but with heart failure you have to have adequate pressure, then you can give IV nitrate. And third is ongoing ischemia. Chest pain is continuing in spite of these 3 sublingual nitrate, then you can continue IV nitrate as well, which is glyceryl trinitrate. Even isosorboid mononitrate is also available in IV population, but we commonly give glyceryl trinitrate. Now, what are the patients in which you can't give nitrate? Very important.
If the patient has taken phosphodiesterase inhibitor for the last...
It's very important because phosphodiesterase inhibitors are usually taken off the counter, meaning by without any prescription. People are sometimes taking it by themselves. So whenever you are giving sublingual nitrate to anyone, especially in emergency, always inquire about, are you taking any drugs for sexual enhancement or anything of that kind. They got, because that's the only drug right now it's available and very commonly used. So sildenafil or vardenafil, these are the 2 drugs in which you can't give within 24 hours of these drugs any nitrate. And the other one is tadalafil, which is long acting. With that you can't give within 48 hours. But we commonly have available sildenafil, even as a generic as well as the original brand. NSAIDs, contraindicated. So it's very important if your differential is, but if you think that there is a likelihood of ACS, then don't give any NSAID. We commonly give Warren or any NSAID for pain, so you don't have to give. You can use morphine or nalbuphine, Kins. These are the things which can be used for pain management. What about beta blockers?
Beta blocker, if there is no contraindication to oral beta blocker use, then it's class 1 recommendation to start oral beta blocker within 24 hours.
But what are the things which you have to look in ACS patient prior to giving beta blocker?
If the patient is in impending shock-like state, in heart failure, the patient has acute bronchospasm.
I'm going to read the statement. You see, in very small statement, they have mentioned a lot of things, which you have to judge clinically in your patient. And these guidelines indirectly are giving you the idea what should be asked in history, like that for nitrate, sildenafil history. For beta blocker, what are the clinical things you have to assess in your patient prior to giving beta blocker? What are those? Oral beta blocker should be initiated. It should be within 24 hours your patient should receive a beta blocker. Within 24 hours, who do not have any of the following. क्या नहीं होना चाहिए? Signs of heart failure. And what are the signs of heart failure?
tachypnea, dyspnea.
These are all tachypnea. Is dyspnea is actually a symptom. We are saying signs of heart failure. So tachypnea, tachycardia, S3, chest crepitations, raised GVP. Now, usually in a patient with stable heart failure, beta blocker are indicated. But this is not a stable heart failure. This is a patient who's coming with acute ischemia and about to develop heart failure. So in this patient, you don't know the fate of this heart failure, how this patient is going to behave. He may develop hypotension or shock because actual cause which is causing this heart failure as an acute heart failure is ongoing unless and until you revascularize. So that's why it's very important, even if your patient is like even mild to moderate heart failure, don't start beta blocker right now. Just weigh how this patient behaves. That's why it's given within 24 hours. Because this kind of patient, other way round, is a patient who's already, वो 4 feature जो high risk के थे, he needs early intervention. If your patient isn't, so in this patient, you are going to take care of the cause straight away, rather than taking care of consequences. So if patient is in heart failure, that this patient needs immediate revascularization. Rather than giving beta blocker, what it should be doing? Taking him to the cath lab straight away. And all these features are other way around, are feature of early revascularization. That's why you're not giving beta blocker, because of you want to take care of exact etiology. Second, evidence of low output state. Now, what is evidence of low output state?
The patient is hypotensive.
Yeah, it's not clear-cut shock, but you are seeing that pressure is 110/100, but your patient is getting cold. He's have some mental obtundation. So you are getting some evidence of pre-shock state. Don't give beta blocker unless and until your patient got a stable state. Third, increased risk of cardiogenic shock. Again, same kind of thing. Generalized ischemia, and you think that patient is going into myocardial stunning, developing some failure, and may go into cardiogenic shock at any moment. Don't give beta blocker. Other contraindications: PR greater than 0.24, second or third degree heart block with cardiac pacemaker, active asthma. It's not just history of asthma, it's active asthma. That means you have to carefully listen the breath sounds to judge is there any bronchospasm or not. Similarly, reactive airway disease, either asthma or any reactive airway disease which is active, you can't give beta blocker. So many things you have to judge prior to writing or giving beta blocker to your patient. Can you revise these things?
So beta blocker should be started within first 24 hours. Only those patients having increased signs of heart failure, then state of
these are the patients in which you don't have to give beta blocker. So you have to exclude these things. Signs of heart failure,
evidence of low cardiac output,
output state,
increased risk of cardiogenic shock, PR interval of prolonged PR
0.24, more than 0.24 PR interval.
No,
can't give.
Second
or third degree AV block
without a cardiac pacemaker, and asthma or reactive airway disease.
Active asthma or reactive airway disease. And if he's stable, then you have to continue your beta blocker afterward. What if your patient is having contraindication to beta blockers?
If the patient has contraindications to beta blocker within first 24 hours, then after 24 hours, then we again reassess the patient whether all those signs which are present in first 24 hours are gone or not, and patient can be safely given beta blocker or not.
So even if you have assessed those 3-4 things in your initial assessment, later on you have to keep on assessing your patient, where your patient is going. If he is stabilized after 24 hours, don't have those features which on which you haven't given beta blocker, then take a chance of starting it. If you think that patient is not in failure, his blood pressures are adequate and everything. What about intravenous beta blocker?
In non-STEMI, then it is contraindicated. It causes harm. So, class 3.
Yeah, it's because of risk of shock.
Sure.
So it's not exactly like that kind of thing that you can't give. You have to judge your patient. If you think your patient is in shock state or in a high risk state, but let's see your patient develop atrial fibrillation, having no heart failure and no shock state, then you can give, because that's the time. In a conventional non-ST patient, there's no urgency to give IV beta blocker. And if your patient is having reactive airway disease, then what you can give in place of beta blocker?
We have non-dihydropyridine calcium channel.
If your patient's LV function is normal, and similar to those things, no cardiogenic shock, no heart failure, nothing, you are holding beta blocker or contraindication to beta blocker is pure reactive airway disease, then rate limiting calcium channel blockers can be used. Can you classify calcium channel blockers? Do you know the classification of calcium channel blockers? Anyone?
Mm-hmm.
So there are two classifications: dihydropyridines and non-dihydropyridines. In dihydropyridines we have verapamil and diltiazem, and non-dihydropyridine we have
all the penes,
amlodipine,
nifedipine, philodipine, isradipine, a lot of nicardipine. What's the difference between the two calcium channel blockers, dihydropyridine and non-dihydropyridine?
Non-dihydropyridine, they are rate limiting calcium channel blockers. They act on the calcium channels in the SA nodes.
What are the two which we have in dihydropyridine?
Non-dihydropyridine. Dihydropyridine, sir, we have amlodipine and
non-dihydropyridine,
diltiazem and verapamil.
What's the difference between diltiazem and verapamil? How you choose between the two, verapamil or diltiazem? Diltiazem is kind of a drug which has both vascular as well as conduction system effect. So a balanced kind of effect. And verapamil is purely conduction system. So usually we choose verapamil when we have to choose rhythm issues like supraventricular tachycardia or severe sinus tachycardia. But a moderate kind of rate with some pressure available, we usually choose diltiazem for rate controlling and for taking care of vasodilatation as well. And amlodipine in this group is purely effect on vasculature, having less or minimal effect on heart rate. And what are the contraindications of these? Heart failure. In heart failure, the non-dihydropyridine or rate limiting beta blocker, calcium channel blockers. Diltiazem and verapamil can't be used in patient with heart failure, LV dysfunction. So in that you have alternative of beta blocker. What you can use then?
Ivertap.
Ivabradine. So ivabradine can be used in such patients who are having reactive airway disease and heart failure, and you want to treat them as an ACS. And similarly, what else there is previously a nifedipine which was slow or short acting nifedipine. That's also contraindicated. You can't give. Let's come to statin. What dose of statin? Which statin? Lipid profile?
High intensity. Statin should be given within
this is
24
all
hours.
We are talking about a patient who's definite ACS. Because initially we started with assessment and now we are discussing a patient who's having definite ACS. So he should be on high intensity statin. Either Atorva 40 to 80 or Rosuva 20 to 40. Lipid profile, What about lipid profile?
Sir, it's 2A to do lipid profile in patient with ACS.
But when it should be done? Within 24 hours. Because after 24 hours, what happens to lipids? Why we don't do lipid profile after 24 hours of event? You see a lot of patients, we don't do lipid profile on these patients. We just start statin. Because one way or the other, whatever the lipid profile will be, we have to give statin. But you can do, if you want to do, it should be done within 24 hours, otherwise it falls low after 24 hours. And then it takes 6 to 8 weeks to get a normal state of lipid profile. So if you want to do lipid profile, it should be done within 24 hours. Otherwise, don't do, just start on statin. And then, but check subsequently after 6 weeks, 3 months to look at the status of lipid profile. Mainly you're looking for LDL. And what are the target you want to achieve in these patients? LDL target?
So LDL more than 40, 100.
LDL less than? 100. No. 90. Previously it was less than 70. But now some guidelines are suggesting in very high risk patient it should be less than 55. So roughly your target should be around 55 to 70. That should be your LDL target. But what if someone is having slight raised triglyceride as well? Then what you will do? Let's see your patients after 6 weeks or 3 months, you did a lipid profile. LDL is 70, cholesterol is 150, 160, but his triglycerides are 250. What you will do? Do you need any other drug for triglyceride or not? When to treat triglyceride? Anyone? Any idea? Triglycerides should be treated once they are greater than 500. Otherwise, you have to just take care of them because you are treating triglyceride not for ischemic heart disease. What is the purpose of treating triglyceride? To prevent pancreatitis. And that the risk of pancreatitis is once your triglycerides are above 500. The just mild increase in triglycerides with someone who's on statin, don't have to give fibrates or anything because triglycerides are treated with fibrates, not with statin. Statin do decrease triglycerides, but not to the extent that fibrates reduce it. So you need in hypertriglyceridemia, in spite of your conservative measures, they are remaining above 500. Then you need a separate drug for triglyceride, which is fibrates. What about ACE inhibitors in non-ST ACS?
Sir, ACE inhibitor should be given in patient with reduced ejection fraction less than 40, or if patient is diabetic or hypertensive or stable chronic kidney disease. It's class 1 indication.
But class 1 is both for those who are having EF
less than 40%.
And what about aldosterone antagonist or blocker?
Sir, same if patient is EF less than 40%, then it's class 1 indication to start aldosterone
What are the
antagonist.
things you have to look for?
Sir, we look for potassium and creatinine.
Potassium should be less than 5. So it should be less than
5.
And second thing, creatinine shouldn't be
more
greater than
2.5.
2.5 in men and more than 2 in women. That you have to look for prior to starting aldosterone antagonist. Now ACE or ARBs. Now then it's very important to judge. We commonly start ACE ARB in every patient of ACS. It's class 1 for those who are having LV dysfunction. It's not class 1 for those who are having normal LV function, who don't have any features of heart failure. It's I think 2A in those patients. ARBs are reasonable in patients with cardiac or other vascular disease who are ACE inhibitor intolerant. ACE inhibitor may be in a patient with cardiac or other vascular disease. even 2B.
2B.
It's 2B which we are giving in our patients. So it's very important if your patient is baseline normotensive or his baseline pressures are 110, 120, 130 and he is having no LV dysfunction. Don't start ACE-ARB immediately. First, take care of your beta blocker, because first you need adequate dosages of beta blocker to take to control rate. Then if your patient may develop pain or ongoing ischemia, may develop failure or anything of that kind, you may need IV nitrate, or even sometimes we give oral long-acting nitrate as well to these patients. So if you steal the pressure with ACE inhibitor in these patients, then you won't be able to increment your dose of beta blocker, won't you be able to give nitrates, which is acute need for ischemia. ACE-ARBs do help, but they are vasculoprotective in patients who are having no LV dysfunction. Just having ischemia, you are giving for vasculoprotection, which the effects of which you need with prolonged treatment. Years of ACE-ARBs may give some vasculoprotective benefit. But in acute situation, when you have very borderline pressure or slight increase in pressure, and still you don't know how this patient is going to behave with beta blocker, he may drop pressures after beta blocker. So it's very important to judge. If your patient is having no LV dysfunction, no feature of failure, I think just wait and see how his pressures behave. If he's still having high pressures after first dose of beta blocker, then you can give, because it's not class 1 in patients with normal LV function. It's class 2A and 2B. And ARB as a substitute to ACE inhibitor. So what are the ARBs which can be used in patient with heart failure or have evidence in heart failure?
So valsartan.
Yeah, valsartan.
Candesartan.
Candesartan. These are the two commonly used for patient with heart failure as a substitute to ACE inhibitor. So it's class 1. And always remember aldosterone antagonist. Unless and until you have seen the potassium by yourself, don't start as a first line treatment with ACE directly. We commonly see people starting aldosterone antagonist and ACE inhibitor without knowing potassium, without knowing creatinine. You can't do that. You have to have clear status of your renal status known to you. His creatinine is normal, potassium is not greater than 5. Then you can give, and then need subsequent monitoring. Sometimes your prolonged diabetics may not be showing raised creatinine, but they have some compromise of their renal function at old ages, especially when you start this ACE-ARB with aldosterone antagonist without furosemide. Sometimes furosemide neutralizes its effect, but without furosemide, then it's a recipe for hyperkalemia. You have to be very careful in that. What about initial antiplatelet dosages? Clopidogrel. Because in definite ACS, apart from aspirin, you have to give any P2Y12 inhibitor. And the 3 P2Y12 inhibitor we have are clopidogrel, ticagrelor and prasugrel. What are the dosages of clopidogrel?
So clopidogrel is 300 to 600 mg.
Depending on situation, age, bleeding risk, whatever the status, 300 to 600 milligram bolus straight away. And aspirin was 165 to 300. That's the bolus you have to give to your patient. And then maintenance of clopidogrel is 75 milligram daily. And what about ticagrelor?
180 mg.
180 milligram bolus
and 90
milligram BD maintenance.
Too.
That's the ticagrelor. And ticagrelor is slightly preferable. It's not class 1, class 2A. If you are thinking of doing early invasive or intervention in your patient, then it should be preferred over. Why? Why do you think? It's evidence based, and secondly, it's short acting. Its onset of action is there within 2-3 hours. while clopidogrel take 4 to 6 hours to act because it's a pre-metabolite. It get metabolized and then start action. While ticagrelor is active ingredients, just go there and start functioning. What about anticoagulants?
We can give low molecular weight heparin or unfractionated heparin. In low molecular weight heparin, we have options of enoxaparin and fondaparinux.
Fondaparinux is not low molecular weight heparin. Remember that. It's a factor 10A inhibitor. So it's not in class of heparin. Fondaparinux is factor 10A inhibitor. But it's similar in action, one step ahead. And yes, you can use, but what's the difference between enoxaparin use and fondaparinux use? What thing you have to consider when you're doing intervention?
So if we are going for intervention, then we should not use fondaparinux.
No, that's a misconception. In that situation, you need additional unfractionated heparin while you're doing cath, any intervention. But with enoxaparin, even with enoxaparin, you may need additional. If you have just given one dose, it's not 2 doses, or its last dose is not within 8 hours of enoxaparin. But with that, I think enoxaparin is a bit complex because you have to remember that how many dosages of enoxaparin are administered and when the patient has received last dose. If you are doing intervention like our patients, they got admitted and their intervention is done in between after 6, 12, 18, 42 hours. Then during intervention, the person who's doing intervention should know when the last dose of enoxaparin was administered and how many dosages of enoxaparin still patient has received. So in that way, I think it's good to administer fondaparinux because we in our cath lab give unfractionated heparin to everyone because sometimes it's very difficult to chalk out when he has received his last dose of enoxaparin. 8 hours before, 12 hours before, or even 24 hours before. And how many dosages are administered, we don't know. Because if you have given unfractionated heparin to a person who has received just 4 hours before enoxaparin and he had received 2 doses already, then you are increasing his bleeding risk. Because in that situation, he doesn't need unfractionated heparin. This enoxaparin which is there is enough to take care of that hardware working within system and you need no further anticoagulation. But if with fondaparinux, you have to give additional unfractionated heparin. So this indirectly also telling you that fondaparinux anticoagulant effect is just there in the pathology. That's it. It doesn't affect the system. So it's low risk for bleeding. It's good to have fondaparinux on board when you are treating someone conservatively. Second, third, fourth thing is it's once a day. So it's less expensive as compared to enoxaparin. We're giving enoxaparin twice a day. And third thing, manpower, less manpower to be used. You need a nurse to administer these drugs to anyone rather than giving twice a day. Now you're giving once a day with similar kind of effects. So with such kind of management we are doing, it's good to give fondaparinux as compared to enoxaparin. And then again with any procedure, you don't have to gauge time, you don't have to look for how many dosages this patient received. One way or the other, you have to give unfractionated heparin. Now, if you don't have fondaparinux and enoxaparin, how to give unfractionated heparin dosages? What is the bolus, and what is the infusion rate for that?
Sir,
and how to give that?
Sir, bolus is 60 to 80 mg per kg. And
60 to
80.
It's not kg, it's international units.
Oh, sorry, international.
Want to add? मुश्किल सवाल है क्योंकि आजकल हमने वो करना छोड़ दिया है इसको ना यूज करना. But sometime in situation you may be at a place where you don't have anything but heparin available.
It's the loading dose is 60 international units per kg, but the maximum dose should not exceed 4,000 international units.
That is 60 international unit per kg. So usually our patients are 60 to 80 kg. That's the common. So 6 is the 36, 3,600. But we commonly give 1 cc bolus. Ideally it should be slightly less than 1 cc, because your bolus dose shouldn't be greater than 4,000 international unit. So your vial, one vial is of
25,000.
5 ml and 25,000.
25,000.
So slightly less than 1 cc should be given as your bolus. And what's the maintenance dose?
The maintenance dose is 12 international units per kg, and that should not exceed more than
1,000 per hour. So roughly what we used to do in our setups when these low molecular weight was not available, we used to take one vial, slightly less than 1 cc as bolus, and then you are remaining with 21,000. Right? We keep it in the infusion, and now we used to give this infusion in 24 hours. So at least 21,000 unit in 24 hours. So it's less than 1,000 per hour, because its dose is 12 international unit per kg. So roughly it's come under that 7,000 to 1,000, 700 to 1,000 unit roughly. But even after starting, you have to have a baseline APTT of your patients. So before starting, just send APTT. It's not ACT. AP, activated partial thromboplastin time. And that dose should be kept where your APTT is 1.5 to 2 times of normal. Let's say you have started this infusion of like at a 700 or 800 international unit per hour, and after 4-6 hours you have taken another sample of APTT after baseline, and see with that rate what is your APTT levels. If your APTT is less than 1.5 of normal, that means you have to increase slightly the dose. So you have to keep infusion rate around in a way that your APTT should be 1.5 to 2 times of normal. And there is no subcutaneous regime of unfractionated. Some people do give, it's for prophylaxis of DVT and other. It's not for ACS. ACS you have to give IV infusion. So I think we are coming to end. Just recap what we did today. We discussed 2-3 things of initial management. In initial management, what you have to look for: oxygen, if your patient is desaturated, less than 90% oxygen saturation or tachypneic. When to give beta blocker and when not to give beta blocker.
In the first 24 hours, we should be giving beta blocker unless the patient has signs of heart failure, evidence of low cardiac output state, increased risk of cardiogenic shock, PR interval greater than 0.24, second and third degree AV block with
reactive airway disease
and cardiac activities without.
What about sublingual nitrate? How to give and what are the contraindications?
Sublingual nitrates, if the patient has symptoms, then we can give sublingual nitrate 3 doses of sublingual nitrate 5 minutes apart.
0.3 to 0.4 milligrams.
The dose is 0.3
and
to
always
0.4
ask any intake of sildenafil or any phosphodiesterase inhibitor within 24 or 48 hours. Then ACE inhibitors.
ACE inhibitors are indicated for patients with reduced ejection fraction of 40 or less than 40, and with that, if the patient is diabetic, if the patient is hypertensive.
These are class 2A for vasculoprotective effect, class 2A or 2B, but class 1 is for patient with LV dysfunction. Then clopidogrel, aldosterone antagonist. For aldosterone antagonist, you have to be very careful about potassium and creatinine. If your patient is having increased creatinine or increased potassium, you can't give aldosterone antagonist. And then clopidogrel 300 to 600. Heparins, we have anticoagulant, fondaparinux, enoxaparin and unfractionated heparin. Fondaparinux has slight edge in a way that it's low risk for bleeding. For conservative measure, it's good, less expensive, once a day, all these things. Okay, thank you.